Good morning, everyone. I don't know whether you guys remember me. I have come preach one time, but it's online. So I may not have met all of you. And I am going to pose an even more difficult question. Do you remember my sermon? Impossible. It was about the Good Samaritan. So actually, when I chose this passage, it just happened to be right after that. And I thought a little bit about the implication, because the Good Samaritan has a lot to talk about how to love your neighbors. But this actually has a lot to talk about how to love your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your spirit, all your might. So I kind of find this is quite an interesting coincidence. And at this time, I'm going to talk about story of women, two women. In fact, I think most of you are very familiar with the story. Starting from Sunday school, you probably have it already over 10 times. But this time, I hope I could give a little bit of new interpretation that probably vindicate Martha a little bit, because she has always been seen as the bad girl, like forget about Jesus, just too busy with just kind of mundane stuff. Let me see whether this works. Oh, sorry. For some reason, because the Facebook actually has some lag, so okay. I just want to make sure it's kind of synchronized. So you guys can see a painting here. It is actually from a very famous German painter in the 17th century, Georg Friedrich Stetter. Why I put this painting here? Because a lot of time I think we underestimate actually how holding a banquet or serving Jesus as a rabbi, we underestimate. In fact, in the Jewish context, this is a big deal. Jesus is a rabbi, and from a lot of the research we know, Martha is actually coming from quite a well-off family. So, and also this time, Jesus, he is not only taking his own disciples. It looks like there is a whole entourage that is following Jesus. That's why, in particular, for Martha, this is quite a big deal. And so this is the context. You can see in the painting, there's just so much preparation. Even when she is talking to Jesus, she actually holds a kind of bird that is probably very precious. Because a lot of these paintings, they do a lot of research in order to paint it. So I think that a lot of time we underestimate actually how important it is to receive a rabbi in your home. And also the Jewish, they have quite well known of excess in terms of hospitality. They really need to put up a very, very good show. So this is a lot of the cultural context when we're not saying that, oh, Martha, why you are so distracted? So, of course, we know the other famous character is Mary that come out. As you see, I have put different color on the words because I want to do some contrast here. What is Mary doing? She is sitting at the Lord's feet. In fact, sat at the Lord's feet has a lot more implication than it seems. In fact, in that context, it means actually being God's disciple. Only being his disciple can be at such a close relationship with him of sitting before the feet is an implication. So what Mary has done is actually something quite radical at that time, because a lot of the time people only regard men can be disciple. But the fact that Mary sees a description of that, that means she is taking herself as a disciple. So this is actually leading to Martha's kind of strong reaction. Another word we see here is listening. Listening to what he said. It's a very focused, it's a presence. But Martha, you can see the contrast. Instead of listening, she is distracted. Instead of sitting at the Lord's feet, she has all the preparation. Now, in fact, Martha doing all this preparation, it's something to be commended. Because somehow, some people have to cook, Some people have to host our guests. But I think what's the problem here? What's the problem with the word here? It's distracted. In fact, if she's doing her job happily, she is serving the Lord all the same. Not only that, not only she is distracted, she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Now, I've underlined that. Why I underline that? Because, of course, this is not a drama. You can just read it from the scripture. But if you are going to put up a drama here, can you imagine what's the tone of Martha? She's very overwhelmed. She's stressed. When you're overwhelmed, when you're stressed, you can only focus on yourself. So she forget that who she is serving. Right? You are doing all this for whom? In fact, she is scolding Jesus. You see this such injustice here. I am doing all the thing. But in fact, this is an exaggeration. We already know Martha is actually from a quite well-off household. In the painting we just saw, there's actually other servant girls, other people. But she wants to emphasize Mary is leaving her to do it all by herself. So when we are stressed, we tend to exaggerate. We tend to think that I'm the victim. Nobody cares for me. We all know that Jesus is the rabbi. Jesus the teacher. But here, Martha forgets. She reversed the role. Instead of being obedient to Jesus, she tried to order Jesus. Tell her to help me. That's actually sometimes I think, of course, you can say this is just applied to Martha. But in fact, in real life, we do that all the time. A lot of us, in the name of providing for our children, loving our children, we actually forget that we are also serving them. How are we taking them to God's purpose? For Mary, in this case, Mary's purpose is to listen and connect with Jesus. And Martha, in the name of serving Jesus, she forget actually most important is to connect with the Lord. So when we are busy providing for children, enrolling them at different courses, the best schools, the best experience, we actually forget to connect with our children. This actually can be applied to many, many situations. But Jesus' reaction is, Martha, Martha. In the ancient time, when someone says something twice, it's meaning an emphasis, a very heavy kind of emotion. It's actually like raising the voice, Martha, Martha, and with some kind of like emotions, because Jesus seeing her going the very wrong way. The Lord answered, you were worried and upset against. I have used very different color as a contrast. The red color is about her emotions, what is going through inside her. Emotion is not something that we have to listen to or let them drag us around. But emotion is something that is very important for us to aware of. A lot of the time we lose our temper because we are not aware what's going through inside us. We just react. We are not responding. So, and also the word many, because that is a big contrast to Mary. Few things and indeed one. So many versus contrasting few and one. Worry and upset versus choice and choosing the better. And most important, why is it good? Not only it is better, but it will not be taken away from her. So what are the things that cannot be taken away from somebody? So we'll ask these few questions. First of all, what is better? What does it mean to be better? And what will not be taken away from her? What can be taken away and what cannot? And Jesus is pointing to making choice. Are we able to make the choice? And what choice we are talking about here? a lot of the time we know there's a lot of difficulties in really making the right choice, the one thing. And anyway, I hope in the following message I will be able to shed some light on these few questions. First of all, what is better? I think a lot of us in church, we do have this hierarchy in our heart. We may not spell out in terms of the sacredness. We think that, being missionary, they are doing the Lord's job. That's the most sacred. If I can't do it, maybe pastor, working in the church, and then maybe followed by some parachurches, faith-based organizations, or if not, then healthcare, social work, education, then maybe government, bank, lawyer, manufacturing is something that has to keep the society going. We will say, finance, brokers, entertainment, politics, business, entrepreneur, we may somehow put them in the lowest category. I actually, about 10 years ago, I switched my career from being a banker to working in the ministry. I studied theology again and went back to teach in a seminary. A lot of my Christian friends come to congratulate me. They all say, Natalie, you are so good. You now can be full-time serving the Lord. But my question is, you are not? Can Christian be part-time? Can you be a part-time Christian? If you are not a part-time Christian, then everything you do, you are serving the Lord. I'm just in a very different position from you. And in fact, I may not be serving the Lord, even I teach in a seminary. So if we look in the Bible, do all biblical characters work in the temple? I think the answer is very obvious. I'm just listing some of the very well-known Bible characters, but they are all having different kind of job. A scavenger, a lot work in government, business, politicians. And in fact, in this book from Robert Banks, also a very renowned theologian, he basically looked at the Bible in a very different light and can identify many verbs and jobs that are implicitly done by God. And Jesus has also said, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. So in the book, he actually lists God is the worker. His work involves creation, sustaining the world, redeeming, and consummation. In fact, all these different sectors we can find in our world now that many of you are performing. And Paul Stephen is my dear professor and also probably has taught KK and Christine. And he has been a marketplace theologian for 6 decades. He is one of the first to really, in a very comprehensive and biblical way, explaining there really should not be any divide between secular or sacred as far as working is concerned. And there's no such hierarchy. If you're a missionary, you are more sacred than me if I'm a lawyer. And basically, all of us are in full-time ministry. It's just whether you know or not. So much more important is, how then shall we work? We know now it's not about the type of work, it's not about the position. So the Martha and Mary's story point to a very important attitude to work, is the mixed life of Jesus. We are very familiar, and there's many passages in the gospel. We saw that Jesus is very busy serving, healing, preaching, and even bringing people to life. But a lot of time we also see that Jesus will go to a solitary place or a mountain to pray and speak to the Father. So this is exactly the kind of mixed life all of us need to probably aim at. Because the best of church tradition combine Mary and Martha as a parallel pattern for Christian living. So we can't have one without the other. Of course, I don't think anyone will have one over the others, but it's the mix, it's the balance. We need to have both action and contemplation, our time with the Lord and our time to reflect before Him. In fact, they are like horse and carriage, love and marriage. They belong together and they are interdependent. So, how then should we work? But you guys will probably talk to me. Natalie, it's very easy for you to say about balance. You don't know my work. My work is overwhelming. My work is very busy. Especially, I think, for the younger, among our younger people who just come out of work, they are very insecure. I was just having lunch with a friend of mine. He has work, he's just in his early 30s. He was just describing to me his work life. He said when he first came out to work, he dared not to leave before the boss left. So he has been working constantly as a lawyer up to 2 and 3 in the morning. He told me there are 3 months he never see his father. So a lot of us actually have work like that. But I can also understand it could be a season. So a lot of us will be objecting. I'm too busy to pray. I'm too tired to pray. So I also want to talk a little bit about Eugene Peterson. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with him. He's the author of Message and wrote over 30 books, and in particular in spirituality. He said that I'm busy because I'm lazy. Do you guys understand? It's so paradoxical what you're talking about. How can I be lazy? I'm really working very hard. I don't know whether you guys have studied the 7 original sins deeply. One of them is sloth, right? Sloth. Sloth is about, they always have them like some people who is very lazy, 躺平,躺平, they are sloth. But in fact, the original language, acedia, more point to the sloth spiritually and mentally. So in fact, a lot of very busy people, in fact, they have acedia because they just don't want to think about some more important things in life. That's a lot of workaholic, because at work, they can get the satisfaction, they can get the reaction, but maybe they need to work about their family. They have some huge issue with the wife, with the children. Maybe they need to look at their spiritual life because they've been so dry. So sometimes when you're too busy, it's actually the time for you to think about. Maybe you are in a kind of spiritual or mental sloth. So of course I'm him. I don't have the authority to say that, so I borrow him. I'm busy because he admit. It's actually his own experience, because I think when he first started as a pastor, he just find that he could never finish all that is brought before him. And in fact, he had a burnout and he has a sickness that he has to leave the job for a few months. And after a few months, he go back, he realized everything is operating normally. He actually doesn't need to be there. Then he's thinking about, what am I busy at? So through a lot of the soul searching, and he decided there's only 3 things he want to focus for his being a pastor, is to preach the scripture, is to give spiritual direction and prayer. Because he figured these are the things that no one can take away from him. Because a lot of the other admin, a lot of other things actually other people can do, or even better than him, But these are the few things he knows that it is what a pastor, at least from his interpretation, is to really preach the word, praying and giving spiritual direction to his congregant. So, a lot of people would say, because why I'm lazy? Because I indolently let others decide what I will do instead of resolutely deciding myself. It was a favorite theme of C.S. Lewis that only lazy people work hard. Now he's even more extreme. Only lazy people work hard. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's the point. We all agree C.S. Lewis and Eugene Peterson is probably some of the greatest Christian writers, and I'm sure they are very productive. And so this is their realization. Because he explained, by lazily abdicating the essential work of deciding and directing, establishing values and setting goals, other people do it for us. So we reduce ourselves into just reacting to the situation, whoever come to us first, and neglecting the very things that we are asked to do in that particular job. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this chart. This is a time manage 101. Okay, you list what is urgent, what is important. The urgent, important, you have to do it. The urgent and not important, you delegate it. And the important and not urgent, you need to schedule it. You need to plan for it. But of course, some of them not important, not urgent, you delete it. But have you ever looked at this chart and write down how you spent your time in last week? I did. I find I do a lot of the delete it box. I was shocked. And I remember listening to one of my students sharing time management, because he's quite well regarded as a very good time manager. He's the pastor of a big church, he's studying, he's doing a lot of service. He said that, in fact, a lot of people will think that you should spend most of the time in the first quadrant, the first box, that means urgent and important. In fact, the most important box is the second box, which is not urgent and important. Why? Because if you spend enough time on the planning, figuring out what is important, and also cultivate good relationship, the urgent part will be reduced substantially. You don't need to deal with so much urgency. If you plan well, because that box is a lot about planning, studying, and cultivating relationship. So what I'm trying to say is, actually, in order to be contemplative, in order to spend time with God and connect with God, it is something that is very intentional. It's not something that, an afterthought, then you realize you're too busy. Do you guys remember Daniel? He prayed 3 times a day, no matter how busy. Why he has to do it? I don't know. I don't think many of us will be more busy than Daniel, right? He has so much affairs. Because we are so easily distracted. We may pray 1 time in the morning, but by the afternoon, we're already so distracted. Actually, prayer is always helping us to anchor, to center back what's most important for us. So, prayers, reflections, and spiritual practice, these are all too important, and you must schedule it. Because if you don't, it's almost like you always meet your boss. You will schedule to meet your most important client. You always want to make sure. Maybe you meet them once a week, once a month. But God, you must schedule. I'm not saying that every time is an extended prayer. Because a lot of people think, prayer inhibits my work. I don't have so much time to pray. But there are many forms of prayer. I think the key is entrusting your day with Him, before work, during work, and after work. Because in the Bible we see there's some arrow prayer, like Nehemiah. When the king asked him, he doesn't know how to answer, so he immediately have a short prayer to God. Like when your boss asks you something, you don't know how to answer. When you are in a difficult situation with colleague, you immediately do an arrow prayer. God, help me. You will be surprised. And this St. Francis de Sales is a very famous, is a saint, and he's very famous for his spiritual writing. He's a bishop in Geneva. In this book, The Devout Life, he has written down how prayer actually changed the quality in everything you do. True devotion does us no harm whatsoever, but instead perfects all things. Every vocation becomes more agreeable when united with devotion. Care of one's family is rendered more peaceful. Love of husband and wife more sincere. Service to one's principal more faithful. And every type of employment more pleasant and agreeable. So it's like a little bit of salt. Once you put it in, the quality of your work, the quality of your relationship, even they were saying, service to one's principal more faithful. I don't know, maybe you have a really difficult boss. Maybe you have a monster boss. But the more you pray, the less monster he look. The more you may think that, oh, actually, I could work with him. But is it only prayer helping work? But work actually also help prayer. Why? I have to quote Eugene Peterson again. In his book, Christ Placed in 10,000 Places, everybody thinks, oh, he's pastors of pastors. He must be always talking about spiritual matters. But in fact, he is one of the biggest advocates of spirituality in the marketplace and through the marketplace and for the marketplace. He said, I'm prepared to contend that the primary location for spiritual formation is in the workplace. Why? I always think that my work hinders my prayer. So I need to pray so that my work could be, less destructive. But quite the opposite. I wonder, among you, how many of you guys play sports? My son loves soccer. His whole life is about soccer. So he has time to practice. He practices at least twice or 3 times a week. But every other week he also has a match. How do you know someone is a good soccer player? Just from practice, can you see it? Maybe a little bit. I remember my niece was telling me, oh, recently I'm learning ping pong. I'm like, oh yes, when are you going to have your next match? Because we all have competition. Oh no, in order to get the certificate, I only have a test. I'm like, just a test? How do you test ping pong? But of course, very Hong Kong. It's okay, I get the certificate. But to be really a good soccer player, I think Ronaldo, Messi, they don't get their medal just by a test. So actually, workplace is the game, the real game we are playing. In fact, because there's so much unpredictable moves, and no matter how much you practice, eventually you have to face a real life situation. And in fact, the practice definitely makes you a better player, but the game also defines you as a better player. So the practice and the game, you both need it. A lot of the time, if we spend too much time just practicing, we would not be good enough because you don't have the real experience of playing a game. But a lot of us in marketplace, we keep playing games without practice. That's why our game never do very well. That's why a lot of people, I don't want to integrate my faith and work. I just enjoy my worship. But on Monday, I'm just going to operate with the law of this world. No, you don't need to. And in fact, it's hard. There's a lot to talk about. That's everything that I teach is marketplace theology and integrating faith and work. But see that as 2 sides of the same coin. We need, of course, I'm not going to go through a lot of prayer practice here, I'm sure. Your pastor will teach you guys on that. But what I'm just want to talk about is not just prayer so that we work better, but in fact, our work also enrich our prayer life, enrich our relationship with God. That's the ingredient you talk to God about. Because if everything is okay, we seldom talk to God, right? But when there's a lot of situations that come through, that's an excellent context. So, in closing, I also want to share the Martha and Mary story and how to give Martha the real vindication. The story has not ended. As you guys know, Martha and Mary has been mentioned quite a few times in the scripture. That was the first time. The second time is actually when Lazarus was dead and Jesus went to resurrect him. But in the course of it, Jesus also interacted with the two sisters. Martha, being the action type, the first to spot Jesus is there. So he immediately went out to meet him. You remember this conversation that Martha has with Jesus. Actually, Mary has almost said the same thing, at least the same sentence. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But he has continued this conversation with Jesus, and eventually Martha has a Peter moment. Martha has done something very important, is to affirm Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, which is to come into the world. Do you remember Peter said the same thing to Jesus? No one answered Jesus, only Peter said. And Jesus very clearly said that if not God, you would not be able to say that. So Martha won. Let's see Mary. Unlike Martha, this time Mary's vision is actually blurred by grief. First of all, she's not even aware that Jesus is there. It's Martha has to tell her, go to see Jesus. And she said exactly the same thing to Jesus. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But she did not continue to see Jesus is the resurrection. Jesus is the Messiah. She continued to grieve. She continued to weep. So score, Martha won, Mary won. Okay, the final passage about them. John 12. That is actually just before Jesus' crucifixion. 6 days before Passover, Jesus went to stay with them again. This is very simple. They just say, Martha served. But Mary did something very special. Do you guys remember? She poured the perfume over Jesus. This time, it's not Martha who scolded her. Who scolded her? Judas. Judas say, oh, this is so expensive. 1 year of salary. You should have, use it on the poor. Now, if we don't have a good connection with Jesus, you will easily agree with Judas. Oh, that's true. There's so many old people, poor people. Why would you spend on Jesus so lavish? But because Mary is always someone that's so focused and so devoted to Jesus. In fact, you ask Mary, why do you do that? I'm sure Mary could not answer you. But Mary just had this close connection with Jesus. She just knows this is the right thing to do. But Martha, being the sister, I'm sure this money probably comes from the family. Martha, the old Martha, would immediately probably stop her. But Martha did not. Although it's a very simple description, Martha served. But Martha served without grumble, served without any disruption or distraction. I think Martha has been doing the same work, but her life has been transformed because she do the same calling with devotion. And in fact, the thing Mary has done that is so right is in memory of Jesus' burial. Jesus in Matthew has said that wherever the gospel is spread, her name should be mentioned in memory of her. So, answering our question, how then shall we work? I think we work with gratitude. We always thank God. And also in continuous prayer, prayerfully. We pray to enrich our work, and so as only that the work can enrich our prayer. So remember before our God and Father, and you work produced by faith. It's very important through prayer and the devotion with God. We know that our work can only be produced in faith. That means we are working in fellowship with God. And we work for God. We work and knowing that far from being a hindrance to spiritual growth, work actually provides a context for spiritual formation. And also, your neighbor prompted by love. Yes, we have to work in love, in fellowship and interdependence with our co-workers, building communities in every way we can. And also, our work is a practical way of loving our neighbors, near and far, as well as providing for our family and loved ones close to home. A lot of the time we may complain, oh yes, especially among the young people, I don't love my job. I don't like it. Yes, I think it's great that if you love your job, but a lot of the time, that's not a prerequisite for us to work. Most important is the neighbor prompted by love. Who among us like to change nappies? Who among us like to feed our babies in the middle of the night? I don't think anyone. But that is a labor that is prompted by love. And lastly, and your endurance inspired by hope. We must work in hope. Because work is very hard. We have to engage a lot of powers, a lot of struggle that frustrate God's life-giving realm on earth. And we must be convinced that some of our work will last and contribute to the new heaven and new earth. That means the work we finish today is not that's it. We will see our work sometime. So I just in closing, to answer the question I posed at the very beginning, whose work mattered to God actually has nothing to do with the religious content, but how much those work are done in faith, love, and hope. And if we do so, the Lord will gladly receive our work, and those work will last. Thank you very much. Bless you all.